Welcome to the B Block Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Scott. I appreciate you for joining me. And we've got Wild Card Weekend, and it seems like the story right now is that Wild Card Weekend really just hasn't been all of that wild at all. Talking to you right now as I record this, I think it's halftime of the Washington and Tampa Bay game. So we'll react to that one later. But so far, between the Texans and the Chargers, obviously Baltimore and Buffalo handling business against Pittsburgh and Denver, respectively. Then you can say it hasn't been all of that wild. It's been nothing but blowout. It's been nothing but double-digit games. But for right now, we are going to actually focus on the Texans upsetting the Chargers. Is that the right way to put this? I mean, I know they were 3-point favorites. I know Rex Ryan said that it was a bye week for the Chargers, that they could just kind of skip this game and go straight on to either the Chiefs or whoever it was, waiting on their opponent. But the Texans were, I would say, the more experienced playoff team going into this game. And they were at home against a team that, quite frankly, had not really done a whole lot to earn a lot of the conversation that it was being given, or a lot of the credit that the Chargers, I think, were being given ahead of this game. Now, I'm going to be straight up on the front end of this. When Rex Ryan came out there and said that he thought the Chargers had a bye week against the Texans, I knew right then and there that he was saying it in a hyperbolic way. I knew that he was just saying it more so for effect, but his point was that based off of the way the Texans had played as of late, or more recently, based off of what we had seen from the Texans, there was no real reason to believe in them, regardless of the fact that it was the Chargers or anybody else. I was mentioning this to Ron Hughley in the press conference, or it was actually in the press box before we left the game. This is after the game was over, before we left. He thought all along, and he was saying this on Sports Radio 16. He thought all along that to talk about, the Chargers having a bye week against the Texans was silly talk, and that he even thought that the Texans would win. He bet his nickname on it, trying to get his nickname back, I suppose, and he got that. So I guess now you address him as Ron the Show Hughley at Sports Radio 610 on the drive. But his whole thing was, the Chargers haven't actually been all of that good. There's no reason to believe in the Chargers in the way that so many seem to be believing in them, to the point that they're a 3-point favorite on the road, despite the fact that Justin Herbert is not exactly an experienced playoff quarterback. And the one experience that we did see him have prior to this one was not a good one, if we can remember back on it. This is a new team. It's hard to exactly predict what this team is supposed to look like against one that, for the most part, had done this already. You're coming back with C.J. Stroud, D'Amico Ryans, mostly the same cast of characters with some upgrades in this game. Why would you believe in the unproven over the proven? And my whole thing about it was, and I maintain this. I'm glad that the Texans proved Rex Ryan wrong. I'm glad that they shut the haters and the doubters up, myself included. Not a hater, but certainly a doubter going into that game. I was not picking the Texans to win it. But the reasons I think were valid. Because the Texans had, the last time we saw them play in a serious game, or the last time we saw their offense out there for an extended period of time, albeit playing their third game in 11 days, which in and of itself is ridiculous. They went out there and scored 2 points against the Baltimore Ravens. I understand it's the Baltimore Ravens. I understand that very well might be the best team in football right now. And they right now feel like the favorite to win the Super Bowl. But to go out there on Christmas Day and to score 2 points, to have on your ledger a game that you were supposed to win earlier in the season against the Detroit Lions and to collapse the way you did on national television at home, like I could see why either as a casual or as a diehard, you would go into this game not having the highest level of confidence. And if Texans fans are honest with themselves, I know there's a lot of gloating. I know there's a lot of beating of the chest. There's a lot of popping the collar and flexing. But if Texans fans were to be honest with themselves, you didn't have the greatest level of confidence going into this game either. I know this because I talk to many of you. I interact with a lot of you. And I know for a fact that there were many that while they might not use the same condescending tone or language that Rex Ryan used to talk about the Texans being a bye week type of opponent for the Los Angeles Chargers, they understood where he was coming from. They also, a lot of the ones I interacted with, lacked the faith and the confidence that the Texans would go out there and handle business. Now, they did. They did that. And credit to them, man. The eye-opening thing for me about this game, the eye-opening thing for me about this game is not the defensive performance that we watched, because that was something that I felt like we could expect. And I'm not saying that you should expect Justin Herbert to throw 4 interceptions in a game after only throwing 3 interceptions in the regular season, that the Texans defense is that good. But they've been disruptive all year. They have been the hallmark of the team all year. And if there is a winning formula that you are going to speak out or articulate or try to project or predict for the Texans in a game, that winning formula is always, or at least this year, has for me, has always been the swarming of this Texans defense. It's been the pressure that you're able to get up front with Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter on the edges, and the luxury, and I cannot stress this enough with the Texans, but the luxury of having extras like Danico Autry and Derek Barnett. Like, you could do worse than Danico Autry and Derek Barnett as like starters or every down players for you on your defense. You could do worse than that. If you just had Danico Autry and Derek Barnett, you would be, oh, like those are to me starter level defensive linemen. Obviously, Nico Autry can bump inside and out, and Derek Barnett as an edge rusher. But to me, primarily as an edge rusher, but to me, the fact that you go to Neil Hunter, Will Anderson, and your luxury items on the defensive line are Derek Barnett and Danico Autry, who make plays for you. And then on the inside, you got this collection of Foley Fatakasi, Tim Settle. You just got obviously Mario Edwards. You got this collection of guys that have been around and are productive, and really on the inside, like I cannot say enough for how much they upgraded the interior of that defensive line. Shout out to them, because I did not see the vision in the beginning, but they certainly pulled it off. But that's where it starts. And again, having those guys as luxury items truly is something that I don't know gets enough attention about this team. The defensive line is better than most. This is one of the better defensive fronts that you're going to find in the entire game. And then to add, the big part about this game is that you get all of those guys both healthy and available at the same time at full strength. Not just the defensive line, but the full front seven. When you throw in Aziz Al Shire and Christian Harris, and just everybody being available to you, really for the first time for a full game all season. Obviously, you've had the suspensions between Autry and Edwards. You've had injuries, and of course Aziz Al Shire himself. You've had injuries along the defensive line, and of course with Christian Harris and your linebacking crew. Like, it's been a hodgepodge combination of a front seven or even call it a front six for the Texans. And this just so happened to be the game where all of that came together for the defense. It should be no surprise that it was humming in the way that it was, or that they were as disruptive as they were. And that was really the story of this game, was how the defensive line was a problem for Justin Herbert, for the Chargers offense, for their front, for their offensive line, and for Justin Herbert. The defensive line for the Texans was a problem from the very beginning. I mean, Will Anderson is kicking ass from the very beginning, and that becomes a theme throughout the night. And then, of course, between Kamari Lassiter, like the play that you get from these corners, Kamari Lassiter and Derek Stingley on the back end, complementing that, like this is an elite defense. Like I just gushed over the offense or over the defensive line for a few minutes without even mentioning that your only all pro player is actually your number one cornerback, and your number two cornerback has probably got to be as good as any rookie defensive player that's out there, and certainly as good as any number two cornerback that you're going to find out there in the game already as a rookie. And so it got me thinking, like, what are some of the major takeaways about the Texans in this game? And of course, you're going to look ahead. We'll look ahead to them playing against the Chiefs and what that's all about. But like, larger picture of what you're seeing from the Texans, I do, and I wasn't anticipating this going into the season. And I know we've talked about the defense being the strength of the team, but this Texans defense, I think you could make the case, is the best that they've ever had. They might not have the best individual player on any Texans. Obviously, they don't have J.J. Watt on the team, right? D'Amico Ryans himself makes a case for the best linebacker that the Texans have ever had. But just from top to bottom, the depth of it, the totality of the defensive roster, I think you could make a case that this is the best Texans defense that you've ever seen. Like you could say they've had better pass rushers than the ones that they've had because they had J.J. Watt. But Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson, with Danico Autry and Derek Barnett as luxury items, that's got to be your deepest pass rushing crew that you've had. And again, the interior defensive line, I think, just kind of stands up with anything else that you'll find out there that the Texans have had in the past, like the depth of it when it's fully healthy. And then I would say on top of that, so that's up front. I think that you could make the case that it's the best when healthy, the best front because of the depth of it. And then if you go to the back end, I feel like Derek Stingley has established himself. I mean, he's the first team All Pro corner. Shout out to All Pro Sting, the first team All Pro corner that I think that they've had, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure the last All Pro corner that they had was Jonathan Joseph, and he was second team. I don't know. I don't believe they've had another first team All Pro corner, and I feel pretty comfortable saying right now that Jonathan Joseph was the best corner to ever play for the Texans. And with respect to Dante Robinson, and I think that Derek Stingley is clearly taking that mantle, right? I don't y'all tell me if y'all disagree with that, but I think that Derek Stingley has already taken that mantle just in 3 seasons already. And the All Pro is indicative of that. So you could say Derek Stingley is the best corner that they've ever had, and then Kamari Lassiter is the number two. Like, I think this is certainly the best that they've had in a long time, the best combination of corners, arguably the best corner play that they've gotten ever between two guys, and the defensive front. And that's before we get to the linebacker situation with Azeez Al-Shaair, who came up with a couple of big plays for them early in this game. And of course, Christian Harris, who was a special player in his own right, and Henry To'oTo'o, who's been amazing for them this year. Like, give me the 2024 Texans defense and put it up against any. And that's where this thing starts. And maybe I wasn't given enough thought to because I was so fixated on how the offense had only scored. Check that, how the offense didn't score at all in that last game at NRG Stadium when they played against the Ravens on Christmas Day. And if it had not been for a hell of a play by Kamari Lassiter, they wouldn't have scored. The whole team wouldn't have scored at all. But that's where their 2 points came from. Like that was just hard to believe in and hard to look past. And then the fact that the Texans, and not everybody likes to get into the numbers or to focus too much on the numbers, but I looked at a very simple one, and that was the fact that other than the Rams, the Texans had the worst point differential of any team in the playoffs at exactly 0. The Rams are the only ones with a negative point differential that made the playoffs. But to me, a 0 point differential usually points to you being about mostly a mediocre or average team. And it's no accident that all the teams except these two that are in the playoffs have really good point differentials. And so to me, that wasn't just being a nerd looking at the numbers. That was something being said about this Texans team. The fact that the offense had been average to below average for much of the year, and that the defense had been pretty consistently good to great throughout the year. This game was a marrying of that. The defense, I think, being dominating at times, and then the offense showing up. Now, I think you also had a couple of really fortunate things go your right, like or go your way, or go right for you if you're the Texans. Like let's just isolate the 99-yard drive that ends in the 13-yard. I believe that's the one that ends in the 13-yard touchdown pass to Nico Collins, if I'm not mistaken. Right, it's the one where, of course, the big play on that drive is where C.J. Stroud, the snap is botched. He's in shotgun. The snap is botched, but he's able to gather it, throw the ball downfield, and find Xavier Hutchinson for a big play that keeps that drive alive. And that's third and super long, deep in your own territory, and you're able to make a big play there, keep the drive alive, and they capitalize, so on and so forth. But that play in and of itself had a luck element to it, even though C.J. Stroud showed you that he's that dude on that play by calmly picking up that ball and finding an open man on a broken play. But that ball did bounce very fortunately. I mean, we're talking about football here. Did bounce very fortunately right into his hands in a way that he was able to take it in stride and make a play. Fortunate there. Very fortunate of where and how the ball bounced on that particular play. Also, the intentional grounding that was not called on that drive earlier. There was some disagreement in the press box on whether that should have been intentional grounding. Obviously, on our row, on the Sports Radio 610 row, we are for the most part all partial to the Texans, even though we don't want to too much outwardly show it in the press box. That's just what it is. Everybody knows who we are on that row. We're kind of like looking around, like, are we sure that wasn't intentional grounding? I think that, and you saw Harbaugh advocating for it. Looked like he might have been just outside the tackle box, but was he really? I know Clint Sterner, my guy from the drive, Clint Sterner said that he was. I know a few of us looked at it and thought that he wasn't. But hey, look, the interpretation of that play was that he was outside the tackle box and that it wasn't intentional grounding. Fortunate to not have that play called. I feel like there was another play on that drive that I'm blanking on that was very, very kind of luck of the draw, kind of how the ball bounces type of play. But that's just an example to me of, on top of needing to play at a certain level, you need some things to just happen for you and to break right for you. And they absolutely did on that drive. And that's going to be the one, like for the offense, the one that I remember of how. Oh, and I mean, how about C.J. Stroud How about CJ Stroud on that scramble, running faster than I think I've ever seen him run in his life, or at least from me watching him in college and in the pros. And I watched a lot of him at Ohio State, and I've watched everything that he's done since he's been with the Texans. I have not seen him move like that. I remember watching that play, kind of missing the snap, and by the time I looked up, I just saw a dude running really, really fast, and I'm like, well, wait, is that CJ? My eyes are not that great either, so I didn't have the binoculars on hand. I'm just kind of, I'm like, that's not CJ running like that? Who is that? It was CJ Stroud scrambling as fast as I'd ever seen him scramble. I'd be interested to know, and I know the Texans are into the GPS monitoring stuff. I imagine they do that in the game, not just at practice, but in the game as well. I'd be interested to know what the GPS monitoring said about CJ Stroud on that play, and if he's ever run that fast a day in his life, or at least since he's been with the Texans, since they've been recording his movements. So that was to me a special drive. In addition to what the defense was providing you, obviously you get the interceptions from Kamar, like you get the interception from Kamari Lassiter right after C.J. Stroud throws the interception. And I know not much comes of that, but you needed, but you needed it. You get a pick six from Eric Murray, who I think gets a lot of undue criticism from the Texans fan base because of the time period of when he was signed and what the regime looked like and the fact that he survived it and he's been around. But I always say, man, there's a reason why he survived all these different coaching regimes. There's a reason why, like, I don't believe, like, Nick Caserio was not the general manager when Eric Murray was first signed. There's a reason why he stuck around since Nick Caserio has been here over the last 4 years. Like, he is a useful football player to you, even if not necessarily an ideal starter or whatever the case. For whatever reason people hate on Eric Murray, man, I think he's a damn good football player for the role that you are expecting and asking him to play. He gets the pick six. That's going to be like to me, depending on how this thing goes with the Texans, could serve as like an iconic moment, certainly a memorable moment in Texans playoff history, young playoff history. Of course, man, the blocked PAT after late in the game after the Ladd McConkey touchdown, the blocked PAT by, was it Danico Autry or Derek Barnett who got that? Gosh, it was one of those guys. But to get that block and D'Angelo Ross run that back, that's something that's never happened. To block a PAT and run it back for two, never happened in NFL playoff history. And if you go back and look at that, a hilarious moment, if you can find the tape of that play, a hilarious moment is Austin Deculus, who is just there, kind of doing his job. They're there for the vibes, there for the fun, but sprinting down with the defensive backs on the way to the end zone. Now he doesn't make it. He doesn't make it for the full trip, and I wasn't expecting it, so I'm not killing him for not making it. But he gave what I think was his best 15, 20-yard sprint on that play that he could give before he just let his hands up in the air in celebration when it was obvious that D'Angelo Ross was going to make it in the end zone to score those 2 points. My actual favorite moment of going back and rewatching the game, because I did not catch that live as it was happening. But yeah, man, the four interceptions, the constant pressure, the four interceptions on Herbert, the constant pressure up front that they were able to get on Herbert, man, you just absolutely love to see it from this Texans team. And like, again, I think it's the most reliable aspect of the team. You can expect them, maybe not four interceptions, maybe not the havoc that they were able to wreak in this particular game, but you can always expect this defense to be one to get after it. The question is going to always be about this offense. And credit to this offense, man. They had 429 yards. They were able to eventually run the ball. It was a little tough there early, but they were eventually able to run the football with Joe Mixon. So when they're able to do that, then they're a dangerous team. Like the frustrating part about the Texans is that they feel like a team that can, like how you say, any given Sunday. That's why they play the games. It's an 8-8 league. You've heard all of those cliches, but you know the difference between a good team and a bad team. You can identify what might just be a mediocre team. But the Texans feel like they operate in the extremes or live in extreme spaces of where they could lose to anybody and could beat anybody. That's the weird part about this team. And how do you know? How do you predict which Texans team is going to show up on a week to week basis, on a game to game basis? It's hard to do that. It's hard to do that. Are you getting the team that showed up against the Jets, or are you getting the one that showed up against in this game, that showed up, that showed up in this game against the Chargers? Are you getting the team that showed up against the Titans, or are you getting the team that beat the Bills earlier in the year? Are you getting the team that showed up against the Ravens, or would you get a team that shows a little bit more fight than that played the week before in Kansas City? Which team are you getting on a week to week basis? It's hard to predict. It's hard to know. Now you can hope that since it's the playoffs, they're going to turn it up. They're going to turn it up a little bit. But it's hard to predict, man. And that has been the frustrating and the rough part about this. But I will say before I get out of here that I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world if they go down there, or if they go up there to Arrowhead, play the Chiefs and lose the game. And we were trying to decide this as we were leaving the press box. Yesterday I was having a conversation with Patrick Creighton, like, because he asked me, hey man, if they lose next week, is the season a failure? If they do the exact same thing that they did last year, is the season a failure? And I'm like, nah, it's not a failure because they won this game. And if I'm honest, I didn't think they were going to win this game against the Chargers. And they were dogs at home, won the game. And then if you lose to the two-time defending Super Bowl champions, there's no shame in that. Or if you were to, at that point, we didn't know who the opponent was. If you were to go to Baltimore, lose to what looks like the best team in football on the road, no shame in that. But the reality is that it can't look like I feel like the season's not a failure, but it can't look like it did on Christmas. Like you can't go out there and just look Mickey Mouse and Bush League and let the Chiefs roll over you. Like you can't let Patrick Mahomes just be like on the sideline with Carson Wentz out there with 6 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. Like this has got to be a competitive game to really feel like all of this was worthwhile. And I've had a good time covering and watching the team this year. I know they haven't necessarily lived up to the expectation throughout, but it's been a good time. And this is a good football team. But again, the frustrating part is not really feeling like you can count on specifically the offense to be what they were supposed to be. And a lot of that has been the offensive line being in flux. But honestly, man, I feel like they've found a rhythm with that. Like they have found some kind of groove with this iteration of the offensive line. I know Shaq Mason is out, and Juice Scruggs had some moments, had a moment or two that was rough at right guard. But with Juice at right guard, Titus at left guard, Titus also has some. That whole offensive line has some rough moments. But overall, as a unit, individually, they had rough moments against the Chargers. But as an overall unit, I thought they weren't that bad. particularly in the run game. But even in pass pro, I thought that they weren't that bad, and they have found some kind of rhythm with that offensive line. Now, does that mean that I trust them against Chris Jones in this game coming up against the Chiefs in the divisional round? Does that mean that I feel like this offensive line can't get got at some point coming up here? No. That I have full faith in it? No. But I do feel like this is the best iteration of it. I do feel like they found a groove with it. I do feel like it is a big deal that both Joe Mixon and Nico Collins remain healthy going into this game. Your two best offensive weapons and hardest to replicate or replace offensive weapons on your team. You don't have anything like a Nico Collins on your team. Um, aside from Nico Collins, you don't have anyone else like Joe Mixon on your team, guys that are that good and as well rounded at their position as they are. Both of those guys are healthy. And I like the supporting cast in its role as supporting cast members. Alden Schultz, Robert Woods. I know John Mechie had the fumble on the first play of the game, and you can't have it. You need him to be more sure-handed and secure with the football. I think he will be. I think they got a lot of faith in John Mechie. And man, we've seen him play good football. So like the the featuring the stars, a heavy dosage of Joe Mixon and Nico Collins with a Dalton Schultz, Cade Stover got involved on a drive, so involving your tight ends in the short passing game and over the middle of the field. Of course, that's where Robert Woods' bread and butter is these days. Getting Deontay Johnson involved, if he can grasp the playbook a little bit better over the next week. John Mechie, Xavier Hutchinson on that broken play that CJ Stroud made something out of nothing, or really something out of what was supposed to be a disaster. Like, I like the supporting cast with the main cast members, right? Like, if you put me in a put me in a corner and make these guys have to do more than what I think should be required of them, I feel a lot less good or a lot less confident about the Texans offense. But what they've got going for them right now, I think that they have found something, and it is going to make this game against the Chiefs a lot more interesting, a lot more competitive, and a lot more fun to watch and cover than it would have been had they had gone straight to Baltimore. Let Buffalo do the dirty work for you. You've beaten them already. I think this is a different Buffalo team. If you were to face them, if you were to get past the Chiefs, this is a different Buffalo team the way that they're playing now, especially based off of how they played against a Denver team that I got a lot of respect for. But I'd rather that I'd rather you let them do the dirty work for you than face this Ravens team that feels like a buzzsaw right now, man. Much rather that, and out of all of them, it's weird to say this considering it is the two-time defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, but out of all of them, this is the most favorable matchup. This is clearly the most favorable matchup that they could find out of all the options. So let's see. Let's see if the Texans have found something. Okay, let's see if the Texans have found something with this group of all with this offensive line group and with the way that CJ Stroud has been playing again over that first drive that he had against the Titans before they sat him down, and his overall game here after the I would say after the first quarter against the Chargers. Let's see if that's what you get against the Chiefs, and I think that you got a really good opportunity to watch a competitive football game. That's all for me on this episode. We're gonna get into that Texas loss later on in the week. I think we're gonna do that on Wednesday. I don't know if I'm gonna have a college football guest or if I'm just gonna take an opportunity to vent about the way the Longhorn season ended. But that's exactly what I'm going to do on the next episode. Be looking out in between, though, for H Town Hoops podcast episode that's going to also drop on this channel with Adam Spillane. We got a lot to talk about with the number 2 seed Houston Rockets, how they're playing as of late. They've been humming. Reed Shepard's back from the G League. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Plenty of Rockets talk to get to if you're interested, and I hope that you are. In the meantime, make sure that you are subscribed to the B Block Podcast, rating it, reviewing it, telling your friends. And until next time, y'all be good.